Several years ago, on a retreat, there came a moment where I realized that for a long time I had been full of shit. And in this moment of the realization, it was so clear to me, I felt I had to do something about it. So I stood up and I apologized to everyone. And I have to say, this wasn't comfortable, but at the same time, there was something oddly liberating about it. Finally, it was okay to be full of shit. I didn't need to be right anymore. I didn't need to be serious anymore. And this happened when I realized finally the difference between the map and the terrain. So in this video, I'm going to talk about that, and I'm going to start off by reading a story from my life that illustrates it. So a few years ago, I went to Costa Rica to try and learn surfing, and I ended up in a small beach town miles away from anywhere. When I first arrived, I didn't know anyone, and I was also hopeless at surfing. And so after my first day being smashed by waves, I went to a small beach bar, and there was a guy sitting there drinking a beer, and immediately he made conversation with me. Over the days and weeks that followed, we became friends, and each afternoon we'd hang out and chat, and he'd tell me stories about all of his experiences, the huge waves he had crushed and the tubes he had surfed, and also what it was like when giant storms came in. And because I was a beginner, I was really impressed by that. He also told me all of the best spots and the secret areas that only the locals knew about. And he'd also watched me being smashed by the waves and falling over a lot. And he'd give me tips on how I could improve my technique. And as I improved, gradually I noticed that I only ever actually saw him sitting chilling in the bar. He didn't join the other locals, getting up at 6 a.m. every morning and surfing out through the massive waves. And one day I even asked if he wanted to come and surf with me. And he was very gracious about it. He said no. But that for someone with his level of experience and his skill, it just wasn't worth going out unless the conditions were perfect. So eventually I asked one of the other locals about him, and the guy laughed and said, he hasn't gone in the water for decades. He used to be okay, but I think nowadays he couldn't even paddle out against 3-foot waves. He's the best storyteller around, but he's no surfer. He just waits at the bar drinking, trying to pick up women and impress newcomers. They're the only people who will actually take him seriously. So this guy at the bar, he was operating from a map. His identity as a surfer was based on the past. It was based on how good he used to be at one point. But at the same time, he wasn't prepared to go in the water. If my surfer friend had tried surfing, and everyone in the town had seen that he couldn't surf, this entire identity he'd built as a surfer would come crashing down. It would be crushing and humiliating, and for that reason he could never take that risk. The girls wouldn't be interested anymore, none of the newcomers would take him seriously, and he'd have to admit to everyone that he was just an aging alcoholic. Now imagine a situation where one of these other local surfers who's pretty good is surfing down a giant wave. Imagine in exactly that moment, an interviewer challenges them and says, "You can't surf." I mean, that person is just going to kind of laugh in their face and say, "You're crazy, I'm doing it right now." When our identity gets challenged, immediately we feel like we have to defend it. And that's because essentially the identity isn't real, it's based on ideas and memories. But if someone actually challenges reality, reality doesn't need to be defended, it speaks for itself. And this situation happens quite a lot. Sometimes I'll talk to someone and they'll be telling me about some amazing spiritual experience they've had in the past. And maybe I say to them, "Yeah, well, that sounds great, but how is it now?" And they'll say something like, "Oh, now is just exactly how it is." But when I say, "Well, how do you actually feel right now?" they don't want to go there. They'll say, "Oh, but there's no me to feel anything." And like you can tell, because people become defensive, it's not just a normal reply, it's a deflection. It's like, "Okay, dude, I was just asking. It's a simple question. Come on." And so the thing is, if you need to defend something, you need to ask yourself, what are you defending? Because reality doesn't need to defend itself. Only an identity needs to be defended. And that's not wrong. It just needs to be seen. And there are a lot of people who know everything there is to know about spirituality. They can talk about emptiness. They can talk about no self. They can talk about impermanence. And as long as they stay in the realm of concepts and ideas, it's perfect. But if it's actually put to the test, then there's a risk of being exposed. So this is why if you go on a retreat with a good teacher, if you reach a point of feeling very present and feeling very calm, they don't necessarily give you a pat on the back and say, stay there. Reality isn't defending a position. So they're not trying to protect your state. Because the goal is absolute deconstruction of the identity structure. And when the identity structure's been fully deconstructed and fully integrated, you just can't be triggered. You have true freedom. You have freedom to fuck up. You have freedom to get triggered. You have freedom to have an ego. You have freedom to feel peace. You have freedom to embody and include everything. The real test of your realization doesn't come in the opening where you feel like everything is love and light. It happens on the most shitty day of your life when you've just been dumped by your girlfriend and you're stuck in a traffic jam and going to lose your job. If you can stay fully present to all of those emotions and at the same time completely peaceful, that says far more than being able to use the right non-duality words to describe a map of non-duality. And also, you don't give a fuck if someone else thinks that you're awakened or not. The actual true benefit of realization is completely personal. Even when they talk about self-realization is defined as realizing yourself to your own satisfaction. It's not to do with anyone else. It's pure, if you think you're self-realized and you know yourself fully, and if that's enough for you, then that's it. In a sense, anytime we try and paint ourselves as spiritual, we're actually painting ourselves into a corner. Because if we do something that isn't spiritual, then somehow we've been seen to be a fraud. So actually, when you make some claim about yourself or about reality, like if you say there's no me, now you've painted yourself into a corner. Because what if your ego shows up? Are you going to be able to admit it? And as I said at the beginning, there was one time that this happened to me, where suddenly I realized that a lot of where I had been coming from hadn't been, well, yeah, it had just been kind of full of shit. And I realized it, and then I had to apologize to everyone. And then I even had to write this long, well, I didn't have to, but I chose to write a long letter of apology to my partner and kind of read it out to her. And this was uncomfortable. But at the same time, to be able to admit that gives you a lot of freedom. And so the reason I'm saying this is that this tendency we have to paint ourselves into a corner with identity happens again and again in the spiritual process. If you think it's not happening to you, I can guarantee you it probably is. And most likely the part of you that thinks it's not happening to you is the one that wants to avoid the consequences of admitting that it is happening. I mean, there have been many, many, many times on my journey where I thought I'd kind of reached some end point or some bottom point of depth, only to have the floor drop out and realize new depths that I couldn't have even imagined. But also it's good to remember that we're all in the same boat here. This is part of the human condition. Like, if we start judging people too harsh for doing this, it doesn't help anyone because it is raising the stakes for someone to admit that maybe they were wrong. Fundamentally, it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to go on the wrong track. It's okay to be a dick. It's just part of life. If you don't mess up, then you're unlikely to grow very much. So now we can do an exercise to actually explore this directly. So when we compare this surfing example with spirituality, the ocean would map to silence in spirituality. And it's one thing to know about silence, and it's a very different thing to touch and experience silence directly. If you experience something directly, almost by definition, you will know nothing about it because it's not repeating. Only the mind is repeating through images and concepts. So now we can explore the terrain directly right now through an exercise. And what this exercise looks like is that we sit in silence with our eyes closed for only 2 minutes at a time, but we do it 5 times. And before you start, get a piece of paper and write a couple of lines about what you think is going to happen, if you have any idea about it at all. And then after each 2 minutes of sitting in silence, you write down, what was it like? What happened? And then you go again, do another 2 minutes, and then write down what it was like again. In this sense, you're exploring something directly. It's not what you know about spirituality. It's a direct exploration of silence in the moment. And this is very much the little tiny waves. If you want to go crazy and do something extreme, don't do 2 minutes, do 2 hours. And in those 2 minutes, you start to deprive your mind of distraction. And you see what's really happening in your head. It doesn't matter if it's peaceful, it's peaceful. If it's frustrating or boring, it's boring. That's okay. That's what you write down afterwards. And so the distinction here is what you write down is the map, and what you experience in the moment is the terrain. And in the context of meditation, almost anything is possible. You could have experiences that massively transcend something that you could imagine. And what defines spiritual awakening to a degree isn't what you know, but it's how you can relate in real time with what's happening right now. So I hope this video has helped you understand a little bit the difference between the map and the terrain. I'm not saying that maps are wrong. Maps are designed to help us orientate. But once we've used the map to find orientation, at that point it's time to put the map down and explore the terrain directly. But when you get confused and think that the map is the terrain, that starts to be a problem. At least if you're interested in spiritual awakening. If you're interested in maps, it's not a problem. Knock yourself out. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'm very curious to hear your experience of the exercise. Maybe you could write that down in the comments. So I'm also going to drop a link to another video where I actually record myself doing this exercise. And at the end of that exercise, I will share a screenshot of what I wrote. So if you feel like it, you can do it with me and compare. So anyway, see you next time.